So the party system in France. So on the left, you historically had the Communist Party of France, the PCF, and the Socialist Party that were dominant. Now the PCF had a strong worker base. By the 1960s, I mean, this was a communist party, but it was critical of the Soviet Union by the 1960s. It usually got around 20% of the vote. So they never had full power, but sometimes they were involved in coalition governments. And I mentioned this when we talked about the UK case. The Liberal Democrats in the UK might find lessons from this. Because by getting into cabinets, various cabinets in the 1980s and 1990s, the French Communist Party ran into a credibility problem. What happened is they were seen as compromising too much on their agenda. And so the 20% that they averaged in the 1980s and 1990s has really fallen significantly. And we can't call this a result of the fall of communism, because throughout the 1990s they gained 20%. But in 2002, in that vote, they gained 5%. Again, it's a credibility problem by being the compromise party. They thought they were doing great for themselves by getting into positions of power, but ultimately they had to compromise significantly, and they lost credibility within their base. Now, the Socialist Party, the PS, was led by Francois Mitterrand for a very long time. He was the only leftist president from 1981 to 1995. He led the party for over 2 decades. So this is a sort of standard social democrat party. In 2012, the Socialists, a grouping now, got 295 seats in the lower house of parliament, in the National Assembly. So on the right, historically, you had the Rally for the French Republic, the RPR, which was Jacques Chirac's party, and a 5-party alliance, the Union for French Democracy, or UDF, which is now the Union for a Popular Movement group. So the Jacques Chirac's party, this Rally for the French Republic, was a statist, nationalist, socially conservative party. The UDF, the Union for French Democracy, was more neoliberal, pro-European Union. Since 2002, Jacques Chirac brought most of the right into this Union for a Popular Movement, which I mentioned. This is Sarkozy's party. And so Sarkozy ruled until fairly recently when Hollande came to power. Now I'm going to date myself. I'm going to have to update this. I'll give updates towards the end about who's in power. But I don't really care if you know who's in power right now as much as what the system is. So the person who's in power right now is from the left. Sarkozy was from the right, this Union for a Popular Movement. And then also you've got the far right, and I've got them in parentheses here. This is Le Pen's National Front. Recall that Le Pen made it into the 2002 second round presidential elections by beating the Socialist Party's Gilles Pen. Then when Le Pen lost, with 82% of the vote going to Chirac, his party split. This is an anti-EU party. It's very, very much focused on protectionism, anti-immigration. Le Pen resigned in 2011. He was succeeded by his daughter, who's tried to make the party more mainstream. They've only got, as of 2012, 2 seats in the lower house of parliament, versus the main right group, the Union for a Popular Movement group, which I've talked about several times in the last minute, but I don't have a slide for. I should write them up here. Just pretend it's written here. Union for a Popular Movement group. They've got 196 seats in the lower house. Again, the left is in control, and Hollande is the president in charge. So now I want to talk about civil society briefly. Civil society has been historically weak in France. And this is in part because of a distrust of institutions, especially parties. Unions are also numerically weak. When you think about France, you probably think about big strikes, unions get in their way all the time. But really, if you strike a lot, that's because you're weak. If you weren't weak, you would get good bargains in the first place. But this is the weapon of the weak. Just like terrorism is a weapon of the weak, this is a weapon of the weak. Only 8% of workers actually belong in the strikes. In the unions. And with such a small showing, they need to go out and strike. Now, in part, the striking activity is a function of political culture, this populist notion that you have to struggle. You have to fight those who are in power. That's the way things evolved in France or revolved. You've got far more industrial reactions or strikes in France than in any other states, 5 times more than in the UK, for example. Now, the public sector workforce is a core of the union, though, and they can be disruptive and they can thwart reforms. And so when you see the strikes, one of the reasons you see that is because some of the things like Air France, I think Air France is still state-owned, Renault, a lot of these places are still state-owned, and so they're public sector really companies. And so people can get out and they can stop, forget about Renault, they can stop the trains, they can stop the airlines from moving, and this is why they're so visible. But again, it's a weapon of the weak, so it's quite weak. Hey, Mai. The business sector is generally well organized. It's got good access to the state, since half of major company CEOs are former civil servants. By civil servants, we mean bureaucracy. Right? So civil society can be subject to corruption because you've got a high movement between the civil service and the corporate world. Many of the corporations being state-owned. So there is this, and we'll see this in Japan as well, the risk of corruption when you have this frequent movement. And I want to dip into the political economy, which we'll talk about for some of the other cases. In France, we're talking about a relatively low level of urbanization and industrial activity up until just after World War II, when you had a strong state hand in the economy. At that point, you had major urbanization. The agricultural holdings were consolidated. The size of the agricultural holdings increased. You had nationalization of certain economic sectors under de Gaulle. They took some industries under their wing to make them internationally competitive. This involved major subsidies to industry, and especially agriculture, which is a huge problem for the EU, the agricultural subsidies. And as I mentioned before, it's one of the reasons that Great Britain, the UK, tries to keep its distance from the EU, one contributing reason. You've also got huge public employment. About a quarter of the workforce is involved in the public sector. So again, that's why when you see the strikers come out, well, they're very visible, okay, because it's public sector. And they've got a very nice welfare system in France. By the 1980s, you had double-digit unemployment and an aging population. And so over the last couple of decades, you've seen a lot of attempts to reform and cut expenditures, and this has led to lots of resistance, large-scale public protests. And these public protests have slowed down this process. So we're talking about a case of export-oriented industrialization to make the state grow, but we're also talking about a significant public sector economy. So here's a discussion question, which I'm not going to ask you right now, although I may put it up and discuss it at some point. So that is that. You're now done with France. Hope you enjoyed it.